"Ma'am, please remain calm, or we'll have to restrain you," said a man in scrubs, his grip tightening around my arm. My pulse thundered in my ears as I thrashed against him, the panic clawing at my chest. "What is this? What are you doing to me?" I screamed, eyes darting wildly in search of Nathaniel, or anyone who could tell me what was going on. But there was no one. Just unfamiliar, emotionless faces hauling me out of my house like I was a fugitive. "My name is Charlotte Anderson. I'm 32 years old. A few weeks ago, I thought the hardest thing I'd ever have to face was losing my father, Joshua Anderson, in a sudden plane crash. He was my compass, my constant, the only family I had left in the world. But that morning, when strangers dragged me from my home and shoved me into an unmarked van, I realized the true nightmare was only beginning. Nathaniel, my husband, the man I had loved and trusted beyond all reason, was nowhere in sight. The ride was endless. Or maybe it was only 30 minutes. Time meant nothing with terror coursing through my veins. I kept asking questions, pleading, demanding, but my captors said nothing. The air in the van reeked of antiseptic, and the low drone of the engine was the only sound filling the suffocating silence. When the doors finally opened, I was staring at a towering, sterile-looking facility with a fence wrapped tightly around it like a noose. My stomach sank. Inside, the unease only deepened. The walls were a cold, institutional beige, and the air stank of bleach and something more sour, like forgotten fear. People in lab coats moved around briskly, their gazes averted, their faces blank. I tried again. "There's been some kind of mistake," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of fear. "I'm not supposed to be here." They didn't respond. Instead, they shoved a set of plain clothes into my hands and told me to change. Then he appeared. A tall man in a pristine white coat, calm and collected, stepped toward me. "Miss Anderson, I'm Dr. Paul Reynolds," he said, offering his hand. I didn't take it. I couldn't. Something about his poised smile and vacant eyes made my skin crawl. "I'm the director of this facility. I want you to know you're safe here." Safe? I'd never felt less safe. "What is this place?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "Why have you brought me here?" He exhaled like he'd heard this question 1,000 times. "I understand this must be disorienting. But you're here for your own safety," he said, coolly. "Your husband expressed serious concerns about your mental state after your father's passing. He's worried about you, Charlotte." The air left my lungs. Nathaniel. The name tasted like betrayal now. This wasn't concern. This was a calculated lie. Just weeks ago, my life had seemed perfect, too perfect. A caring husband, a gorgeous home, a future that felt secure. And at the center of it all was my father, the man who had raised me alone after my mother passed when I was a child. He was the one person I could always count on. When his private jet went down without a warning, the grief nearly destroyed me. But I hadn't lost my mind. I was grieving. Mourning. Not unstable. And now, I was locked away like I was dangerous. Like I didn't even know my own truth. I remember the exact moment the phone rang. I was knee-deep in planning a charity event for one of my father's foundations when the screen lit up. "Miss Anderson, we regret to inform you." The rest blurred into static as my knees gave out and I collapsed into the nearest chair. A plane crash. No survivors. It felt impossible, like I was caught in someone else's nightmare. My father, my rock, was gone. The funeral was a haze. I stood beside my husband, accepting sympathy from people I didn't recognize. The sorrow was crushing, but nothing compared to what came next, the sterile reading of the will. That was when I found out I was inheriting everything. The entire Anderson fortune, the businesses, the estate, it was all mine now. I hadn't even begun grieving before I was pushed into a world of board meetings, market projections, and decisions I had never prepared for. Now, I was sitting in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room inside a psychiatric facility, and nothing made sense. The hum of the overhead lights filled the air, and the beige walls felt like they were closing in. My mind kept circling back to what Dr. Reynolds had said, "This is for your protection. Your husband is worried about you." Worried? Nathaniel hadn't said a single word about this. How could he have me committed without even talking to me? Any time I asked questions, I got the same vague, rehearsed reply: "This is what's best for your health." My health? They thought this was helping me? I wasn't even allowed to call Nathaniel, or anyone else. When I tried to refuse the pills they handed me, a nurse simply hovered nearby until I gave in and swallowed them. Not long after, everything went blurry. My thoughts slowed, my body felt heavy. I could almost feel myself fading with every dose. When I finally came to, the silence was the first thing I noticed, not soothing silence, but an unsettling, clinical void. My eyes blinked open to find a stark room, furnished only with a narrow bed and a cold steel wheelchair in the corner. The walls were blank, eerily white, no windows, no clock, not even a mirror. Just void. For a moment, I wondered if I was still dreaming. But the ache in my joints told me otherwise. My head was pounding, my throat dry as sandpaper. I tried to sit up, but my arms and legs were like lead. The air smelled faintly of chemicals, sharp and artificial. Somewhere, a distant machine buzzed faintly in the background. I scanned the room, desperate for anything familiar, anything at all. There was nothing. A lump rose in my throat, and I croaked out, "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" My voice cracked from disuse, barely echoing back. The stillness wrapped around me like a vice. The longer I sat there, the more suffocating it became. Fear turned into rage. Suddenly, I was on my feet, my fists slamming against the nearest wall. "Let me out!" I cried, my voice breaking. "Where am I? Someone tell me what's going on." Each impact sent pain shooting through my hands, but I didn't stop. The betrayal, the helplessness, the isolation, it all surged through me like a storm. I didn't hear the door open behind me. A nurse entered, a syringe already in hand. Her face was blank, emotionless. "Please calm down, Miss Anderson," she said, her voice mechanical and devoid of warmth. I stumbled backward, shaking my head in disbelief, but before I could even react, she seized my arm with startling strength and drove the needle into my skin. "No, don't," I yelled, but it was already too late. The world around me blurred as dizziness took over, and my knees buckled beneath me. My final conscious thought before slipping into darkness was that this couldn't be real, this had to be some sick dream. The next 2 weeks disappeared in a fog. I didn't even realize how much time had passed until I overheard a nurse casually mention it in passing. I spent nearly every moment in a medicated daze, my mind sluggish and detached from everything around me. The drugs muted everything, my thoughts, my feelings, even the sensation of being in my own body. I no longer had the will to ask why. The version of me that had once questioned everything, who had resisted and fought for answers, felt like a stranger I could barely remember. I'd drift awake just long enough to choke down bland, flavorless meals before fading out again. My dreams were twisted and surreal, faces morphing, voices echoing as if underwater. Sometimes, I'd think I saw Nathaniel in those dreams, but I could never be sure if it was real or just the last flicker of hope clinging to my consciousness. Every time I opened my eyes, the heaviness returned, dragging me further into an abyss I feared I wouldn't escape. I wasn't living anymore, just floating in place, and that terrified me. I watched her closely, trying to determine if she was being serious or just toying with me. But Lily's eyes didn't waver. There was something calculated about the way she carried herself, calm, cool, but always watching. I didn't trust her, not fully, but what other option did I have? For the first time in weeks, someone was speaking to me like I was a human being, not a hollow shell numbed by medication. "What do you mean?" I rasped, my voice barely more than a croak. Lily leaned in, keeping her voice low and deliberate. "This place isn't just a hospital for the unstable," she whispered, glancing around to ensure we weren't being watched. "People are sent here when someone wants them out of the picture." "You really think you're the first?" Her words hit me like ice water in my veins, but before I could react, she leaned back and returned to her food as if she hadn't just dropped a bomb in my lap. "You can either trust me," she said, stabbing her fork into her tray without looking up, "or you can stay here and rot." No matter what trouble followed her, I knew one thing for certain: she might be my only way out of this place. That afternoon, during the short window of supervised free time, Lily found me again. She slid into the seat beside me with an air of casual ease, as if we were old friends catching up. "I've escaped before, you know," she said, casually twisting a strand of her dark hair around her finger. I turned to her, masking my disbelief. "You've broken out?" I asked in a whisper. She nodded, a faint smirk curving her lips. "A few times. It's not as impossible as they want you to believe. But they always find me. Life on the outside's rough, and I stand out too much. So they drag me back, drug me up, and pretend like it never happened." Her voice didn't tremble, but I saw the flicker of bitterness in her eyes. "But you," she said, fixing her gaze on me. "You're not like the others. You're a threat to someone in here. That's why they're keeping you numb. And that means if we team up, we've got a real shot. Let me know if you'd like the next section rewritten too." Lily leaned in, her voice barely a breath against the low hum of the room. "They caught me again, the day before you showed up," she confessed, and for the first time, her trademark smirk vanished. "I almost made it, but they found me a few blocks away. Same drill, dragged me back, drugged me up, tossed me in solitary. But this time, I've been watching. Studying. The new guards? They're sloppy." I tilted my head, cautious but intrigued. "New guards?" I asked in a hushed tone, my voice unsteady with a mix of fear and curiosity. She nodded, eyes sharp with intent. "Especially on night shift. They're careless, phones out, zoning off. I've been tracking their routines, when they switch shifts, when the cameras go unwatched, where they leave doors cracked open because they're lazy." Her gaze scanned the room, quick and careful. "If we're smart, we'll be out before they even realize we're gone." For the first time since I arrived, something flickered inside me, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. Over the next several days, Lily and I quietly built a plan. She'd lean over during meals or whisper during rec time, only when no staff were within earshot. Every detail was critical: when the guards traded posts, which hallways were least patrolled, and how long it would take to get to the rear gate unnoticed. "Timing is everything," she murmured one evening, swirling her tasteless soup like it was just another normal day. "If they catch us, it's over. They'll up the dosage and lock us down permanently." We chose a date, 2 nights out, during the quietest shift, when most staff were either dozing off or glued to their phones. Lily would trigger a commotion near the nurse's station, buying me just enough time to sneak through the corridor with the stolen keycard she'd lifted weeks earlier. Once past the cameras, we'd meet by the old maintenance exit, one she claimed hadn't been locked in forever. "It's dangerous," she admitted, her tone the most serious I'd ever heard it, "but it's our only shot." I swallowed hard and nodded. Dangerous didn't even begin to describe it. But staying wasn't an option. The night we chose, my pulse roared in my ears as I waited for the signal. When Lily toppled a supply cart with a deafening crash, the sound echoed through the halls. Guards scrambled toward the noise, just as planned. I slipped through the hallway, clutching the key card so tight it left marks in my skin. My body felt sluggish from the meds, but adrenaline dragged me forward. Lily was already waiting at the back exit, her cheeks flushed with exertion but her eyes laser-focused. We had just reached the perimeter when I heard the shouting. "There! Stop them!" I turned in time to see flashlights slicing through the dark. Panic surged like lightning through my veins, but Lily gripped my arm tight and pointed ahead. "Don't stop," she growled. "The wall's just ahead. Move." There was no time to think. I sprinted toward the massive wall, each step searing through my legs like fire. My muscles screamed, but I kept pushing. When I reached it, I grabbed onto the rough surface, hauling myself upward even though it felt like my arms might give out. Behind me, I heard Lily shout, "Keep moving, Charlotte. Don't stop." I turned and saw her standing her ground, fearless, holding off the guards with a broken plank she'd yanked from the ground. She swung it with everything she had, buying me seconds I desperately needed. "Go," she yelled again. I couldn't believe I was climbing that wall at all, not after everything they'd pumped into me. Days of sedatives had left my limbs like lead, my thoughts foggy, my body weak. Every movement was agony. But something primal took over, the kind of instinct that kicks in when survival is your only option. My fingers dug into the jagged surface, scraping raw as I pulled myself up, inch by inch. Lily's voice echoed behind me, shouting, struggling, distracting the guards. My arms were shaking, my legs barely responding, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. One last surge of strength, and I was over the top, crashing hard on the other side. The fall knocked the wind out of me, but I was free. For the first time in weeks, I felt the cool breeze on my face. I was outside. But all I could think about was Lily, who stayed behind so I could make it out. The next 48 hours passed in a haze of panic and fatigue. I had no direction, no idea where to go, and nowhere to hide. The city felt foreign, dangerous. Every sound, a car backfiring, a door slamming, footsteps behind me, made my pulse spike. I kept to the shadows, ducking into alleys and abandoned corners, terrified someone might recognize me and drag me back. My body barely functioned. The drug still lingered in my veins, slowing everything down. I was hungry, disoriented, and too scared to sleep. Freedom wasn't what I thought it would be, it was cold, isolating, and just as terrifying. But Lily stayed on my mind. Was she safe? Had they punished her for helping me? The guilt twisted in my stomach, but I kept going. I had to. I didn't have a choice. After 2 days on the streets, I knew I couldn't survive alone. I needed someone, and the only name that came to mind was Jonathan Sachs. But I couldn't afford to be reckless. I'd scavenged enough spare coins from sympathetic passers-by to use a payphone, holding out a battered coffee cup near a crowded crosswalk and keeping my face down. It was humiliating, but it got me what I needed. With trembling fingers, I punched in the main line for Anderson Steele. When the receptionist answered, her voice was crisp and detached. "Good morning, Anderson Steele. How may I direct your call?" I paused, then forced a lie out with as much confidence as I could muster. "Hi, this is Anna Collins," I said, steadying my voice. "I used to work with Jonathan Sachs. I need to speak with him, urgently." There was a pause on the line, and my pulse pounded as I imagined her doubting everything I'd said. But then she replied, "One moment, please," and the line clicked into hold. I exhaled shakily, clutching tightly to the fragile hope that he might actually come to the phone. When the call finally reconnected, I heard his voice, measured, composed, unmistakably Jonathan Sachs. The same calm tone I remembered from the rare occasions he had spoken with my father. "This is Jonathan Sachs." My grip on the phone tightened until my fingers ached. "Jonathan," I said, my voice cracking, "it's me, Charlotte." There was a pause, and I heard the faint sound of papers shifting in the background. When he spoke again, his voice was tinged with confusion and restrained emotion. "Charlotte? Where have you been?" everyone thought. I didn't let him finish. "I can't tell you where I am," I interrupted, my words rushing out in a whisper. I cast a nervous glance over my shoulder, half convinced someone might be lurking nearby. "But I need your help. I've been committed to a psychiatric facility, Jonathan. They've been drugging me, keeping me sedated. They said I was unstable, but that's a lie. It was Nathaniel and his mother. They're the ones who did this." As soon as his voice came through the line, smooth and professional, I gathered what courage I had left. "Jonathan," I said softly, keeping my tone low and guarded. "It's Charlotte." He hesitated. I could feel his uncertainty even through the phone. "Charlotte? Where have you, what's going on? We thought you were." I can't explain it all right now, I said sharply, more urgent than I meant to sound. But I need to meet you. Just you, no one else. His silence stretched, doubt creeping into his voice. Are you okay? What's happening? I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. Please, Jonathan. Don't tell Nathaniel or Martha. Promise me. A long silence. Then finally, all right. Where should I meet you? He showed up at the park right as the sun was dipping below the trees, casting soft orange light across the grass. I watched him from a distance at first, hidden behind a tree trunk, making sure he was alone. When I finally stepped into view, his face went ashen. Charlotte, he breathed, as if he wasn't sure I was real. You look, my God, what's happened to you? I gestured toward a nearby bench, too drained to speak right away. We sat down at the far edge of the park, away from the noise of kids playing and joggers passing by. My voice was raw when I finally spoke. They destroyed everything, Jonathan. I kept my hands folded in my lap, trying to stop them from trembling. Nathaniel and Martha, they orchestrated all of it. After my dad passed, they had me declared mentally unfit. They had me locked up. I'd been sedated, isolated. I barely existed for weeks. I choked back a sob. And you know the worst part? They'd vanished. No calls. No visits. Not a trace of them. They discarded me like garbage. Like I didn't matter at all. Jonathan leaned in, resting his elbows on his knees, struggling to absorb the whirlwind of revelations I'd just dropped on him. Why would they do that to you? He asked, his tone a mix of disbelief and simmering anger. Nathaniel loved you, didn't he? And Martha, what would drive her to such extremes? I shook my head slowly, my fingers clenched around the edge of the bench until they ached. That's what I have to figure out, I said, my voice steadier now. I don't think it's just about the money. It feels bigger, like they didn't just want to cut me out, they wanted me gone. But why? What were they so afraid of? I turned toward him, hoping the urgency in my voice would sink in. I need your help, Jonathan. You knew my dad well, and you've always had a good grasp of the company. If anyone can help me piece this together, it's you. He leaned back, letting out a slow breath as he mulled over my words. Then he nodded, his expression resolute. Okay, he said. I believe you, Charlotte. And if everything you're saying is true, then we don't have a moment to waste. You need somewhere safe, off the grid. His eyes scanned the park around us before settling back on me. I've got a little cabin just outside the city. It's nothing fancy, but it's private. No one would think to look for you there. Relief washed over me, though exhaustion still clung to my bones. I followed him to his car, keeping my head low, nerves prickling every time a car passed or someone walked by. The drive was quiet. Jonathan glanced at me now and then, worry carved into every line of his face. When we arrived, I saw he'd been honest. The place was small and simple, nestled in the woods where the world felt far away. It's not much, he said as he opened the door and guided me inside, but it's safe. I'll bring you food, clothes, whatever you need to lay low and stay comfortable. I nodded, too emotionally drained to speak, but deeply grateful. His support felt like the first solid ground I'd stepped on in weeks. The next morning, I woke up with a clearer head. The room was quiet and warm, a world away from the cold white walls and locked doors I'd known. My body still ached from the chaos of the last few weeks, but my thoughts were sharper. I stretched slowly, breathing in the stillness. Not long after, Jonathan returned carrying a grocery bag and a look of resolve. I've been thinking about what you told me, he said, placing the bag on the counter. So I reached out to someone, an old contact. He's a private investigator, and I gave him the basics. He's agreed to help us look into it. We need to know who was involved, what they were trying to cover up, and how far it goes. His voice was calm but laced with tension. This won't be easy. But if there's a trail, we'll find it. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope take root in my chest. I wasn't alone anymore. And I wasn't going to let Nathaniel and Martha get away with what they'd done. A week later, the front door creaked open. Jonathan entered, his expression serious, followed by a man who looked like he'd walked straight out of a noir thriller, tall, observant, carrying a worn leather briefcase. His sharp eyes met mine with quiet curiosity. "This is David Harper," Jonathan said as they stepped inside. "The PI I mentioned. David, meet Charlotte." David offered me a polite nod. And just like that, the fight for the truth had officially begun. David placed his briefcase on the small kitchen table and opened it with swift, deliberate movements. "Miss Anderson, I've spent the last week unraveling what really happened to you," he began, setting down a thick bundle of papers, photographs, and handwritten notes. "What we've uncovered is far worse than we imagined, and the extent of the cover-up is staggering." He laid out the first documents, official files stamped with seals and signatures. "This one," he said, pointing at a psychiatric report, "is completely fabricated. Nathaniel and Martha paid off a psychiatrist, Dr. Evelyn Mars, to create a false evaluation. It claims you were a threat to yourself after your father's death and needed urgent institutionalization." I stared at the paper, nausea rising in my throat. "But that's insane." I was grieving, but I was never unstable. David nodded, his expression tight. "Grief wouldn't have been enough for a court order, so they painted a much darker picture: false claims of paranoia, violent mood swings, even alleged self-harm. None of it ever happened. But that bogus report became the cornerstone of everything that followed." He pushed another document toward me. "Here's the court order." It was signed by Judge Leonard Grayson, someone with a reputation. I've seen his name linked to several expedited rulings, all with questionable circumstances. He was bribed to rush your case through and skip the normal checks. Across the room, Jonathan leaned silently against the wall, arms crossed, fury slowly rising in his features. David kept going, now producing another batch of files. Once that order was signed, it went straight to the facility. That place is run by Dr. Paul Reynolds and a group of investors known for taking in high-profile inconveniences. They operate in the shadows, and for the right price, they'll keep someone locked up, out of sight and drugged into silence. He laid down a photo of Reynolds and Nathaniel, shaking hands at what looked like a secluded meeting. "This was snapped 3 days before you were committed." My throat clenched as I reached for the picture, my hand trembling. "Nathaniel planned this, they both did," I murmured, barely able to get the words out. David nodded grimly. "It was all orchestrated. They wanted to ensure you were sedated constantly, just enough to keep you disoriented and discredited. Here's a ledger," he added, tapping another sheet. "Nathaniel wired $250,000 to Reynolds the day after you were admitted. That money bought your silence, your disappearance." I felt dizzy, the room tilting as the betrayal settled into my chest like lead. "What about Martha?" I asked, my voice raw and unsteady. David's jaw tightened. "She was a key player. We found emails between her, Nathaniel, and Dr. Mars. Martha was the one who pushed for this plan. She convinced Nathaniel it was the only way to secure the Anderson estate. With you out of the way, they had full control." He handed over a printed chain of emails, cold, calculated conversations about creating fake reports, bribing the judge, and maintaining your sedation indefinitely. "They were meticulous," he said, voice low, "but they made 2 mistakes. They underestimated your strength, and my team's ability to trace the truth through the wreckage." Jonathan, who had remained quiet until now, finally broke the silence. "Charlotte, this is enough to bring them down. With this kind of proof, we won't just expose them, we'll make sure they're held accountable for everything they've done." His voice was controlled, but I could hear the restrained fury beneath the surface. I glanced down at the pile of evidence spread across the table: documents, emails, photos, and signed statements, all pointing to the elaborate scheme they had built to trap me, discredit me, erase me. The fear that had gripped me for so long began to crack, replaced by something far stronger: resolve. "They thought they could erase me," I said quietly, my voice laced with steel. But they're about to find out how wrong they were. Once Jonathan and David left, the house grew quiet again, and I was left alone with the gravity of what had just unfolded. I sat in the same spot, eyes fixed on the incriminating stack in front of me. My fingers hovered over one photo, a clear shot of Nathaniel shaking hands with Dr. Paul Reynolds, the man who had overseen my so-called treatment. The image made my stomach twist. It was like looking at a stranger. Could this really be the same man I once believed loved me? Nathaniel. Just the name sent a jolt through my chest. How could he, of all people, be capable of this level of cruelty? He had held me when I cried, whispered comfort when I was drowning in grief, promised to stand by me. Now, all of those memories felt like ashes in my hands. Was it all an act? A carefully staged performance cooked up between him and his conniving mother? I pressed my hands to my face, the tears finally slipping free. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated, heartless takedown of everything I had, my identity, my autonomy, my future. They had tried to erase me like I was a nuisance to be scrubbed away. The next morning, Jonathan returned earlier than expected. His expression was intense, but his eyes were hopeful. "Charlotte," he said, motioning for me to sit. "David and I met with the authorities last night. After reviewing the evidence, they've confirmed our case is solid. They're ready to move. Warrants have already been issued." I stared at him, stunned. "It's really happening?" I asked, barely managing to get the words out. He gave a firm nod. "Yes. They're coordinating the arrests now. Nathaniel and Martha will be picked up at the same time, quietly and efficiently. No chance for them to slip away." A rush of emotion flooded through me, relief, fear, hope. "What happens next?" I asked. "They'll be brought in for questioning. The evidence will do the rest," he said. Then, as he stood, he added calmly, "They've already stationed officers at the mansion. If either of them tries to bolt, they won't get far." After he left, I sat in front of my phone for what felt like forever. My pulse was racing, my chest tight. I stared at Nathaniel's name in my contacts. And then, without letting myself think twice, I pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Charlotte," he answered, sounding breathless. "Oh my God. Is it really you? I've been so worried. Where are you? Are you all right?" I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "It's over, Nathaniel," I said, and this time, my voice didn't waver. "Drop the performance, Nathaniel," I said coldly, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm not calling for excuses. I know everything now." There was a pause, long enough to hear his breathing shift. When he spoke, his voice was careful, laced with forced concern. "I don't know what you mean," he said slowly. "Where have you been? Everyone's been searching for you." I was terrified something happened. "Terrified I'd escape, you mean?" I shot back, gripping the phone with white knuckles. "Afraid I'd uncover the web of lies you and your mother spun to get me locked up? Spare me the act. I know about the fake diagnosis. The bribes. The payments to the staff to keep me sedated and silent. It's over, Nathaniel." His hesitation was palpable. When he spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. "Charlotte, you've been through a lot, maybe you're not remembering things clearly." "Don't you dare," I hissed, cutting him off. "Don't you dare gaslight me. I have every receipt, every signature. The forged documents, the payments to the clinic, it's all laid bare now. You and Martha tried to disappear me, and you failed." Silence again. Then, a tremor in his voice. "Charlotte, I didn't know what else to do," he said, almost whispering. "Martha told me it was best, that you were unraveling after your dad's death. She convinced me it was temporary. Just until you stabilized." "Stabilized?" My voice rose, incredulous. "You call drugging me into submission and throwing me into a locked ward stabilizing? You destroyed my life, Nathaniel." "I didn't want to destroy anything," he snapped, the mask slipping. I was scared. She said if you were deemed unfit, we'd have access to manage the estate until you recovered. I thought it was a stopgap. I thought. You thought I'd just vanish quietly, I finished for him, fury boiling over. Don't lie to yourself. This was never about helping me. This was about control. About greed. Just admit it. No, he cried, desperation bleeding into his voice. I loved you, Charlotte. I still do. I swear I never meant to hurt you. Martha, she was relentless. She kept insisting it was the only way. I didn't know what to do, and I. Stop blaming her. I snapped. You weren't forced. You signed those papers. You wired those payments. You watched them sedate me and leave me to rot. Own it, Nathaniel. For once, just take responsibility. I didn't realize it would go that far, he shouted, his voice cracking fully now. I thought it would be simple. That you'd be out of the way temporarily, and we'd figure it out later. I didn't know they'd drug you like that. I didn't know you'd. He trailed off, his breath hitching. The silence on the line was heavy now, he knew. The guilt was finally settling in. And for once, he had nothing left to say. You didn't know? I echoed, my voice laced with venom. No, Nathaniel. You chose not to know. You turned a blind eye because facing the truth meant facing her, and you were too much of a coward to do that. So don't you dare act like you're some kind of victim. You let her ruin me, and now it's your turn to face the fallout. His voice was a hushed tremor on the other end of the line. Charlotte, I'll make it right. I'll come clean, I'll go to the police, I swear. Just, please believe me. I never stopped loving you. Loving me? I repeated, each word colder than the last. If this is what love looks like to you, then I'm grateful I never needed it. You and Martha didn't just hurt me, you dismantled everything I was. There's no redemption here, Nathaniel. You crossed a line you can't come back from. There was nothing but silence for a long beat, just his shallow breathing echoing through the phone. I'm sorry, he finally whispered. I don't know what else to say. You can say it to the detectives, I replied, my tone flat and final. Before he could speak again, I ended the call. My fingers lingered on the receiver for a second, and then I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't closure, but it was something. The next morning, I stood across from the mansion that once bore my name, now crawling with flashing lights and officers in uniform. Red and blue reflections danced across the pristine windows, transforming the house into something surreal, almost ghostly. I watched, unmoving, as officers climbed the marble steps and knocked with the authority of justice. The door opened. And there they were, Nathaniel and Martha. He looked ghostly, pale and unsteady, all traces of his once careful polish gone. As they cuffed him, his eyes darted across the crowd. When he saw me, he froze, his body snapping rigid with disbelief. Charlotte, he cried, his voice torn with panic. Charlotte, please, let me talk to you. He lunged toward me, but officers held him back. I stood still, expressionless. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. There would be no mercy, not anymore. He struggled, shouting even as they dragged him to the waiting cruiser. I love you. Don't do this, Charlotte. The car door shut behind him, and his voice disappeared into the background noise. Martha was different. Regal, composed, and silent. Not a word passed her lips, not a flicker of emotion crossed her face as she surrendered to the arrest. Her spine was stiff, her chin high, as if she still believed she could control the narrative. She didn't even look my way. But her silence said more than any outburst could. Her empire was crumbling, and she knew it. As the vehicles pulled away, I stood rooted for a moment longer, letting the weight of it settle over me. A strange mix churned in my chest, relief, sadness, rage, and something else. Something like freedom. I turned my back on that house and walked away. I didn't look back. They had tried to erase me, bury me beneath their lies, but I was still here. Still standing. And this time I was finally free to breathe.